Perhaps you've noticed the overgrowth of landscaping in Oxnard's parks and medians, or experienced some of the roads in need of patching or repair. Maybe you've heard about or experienced slower response times by public safety for non-emergency calls for service, or the reduction or closure of community services such as the Carnegie Museum, library hours, or recreation programming. Well, all of these reductions are the result of budget cuts by the city due to the cost of providing those services exceeding the actual revenue that we have coming in. Thus, to try and remedy this deficit, the city has proposed Measure E, a local sales tax for general services. First, let's do a really quick recap on how our state sales tax works. In the state of California, we have a minimum sales tax of 7.25%, meaning that for every dollar spent on qualifying purchases, we pay 7.25 cents toward this tax. How does this actually break down? Well, 6.25 cents of every dollar goes towards the state and the county. The remaining 1 cent goes to the city. However, in 2008, voters adopted an additional half cent to be added to that, meaning that the city of Oxnard receives 1.5 cents for every dollar spent on qualifying purchases. Measure E is proposing to instead have 3 cents for every dollar stay within the city of Oxnard for use on local general fund expenses. So what exactly are qualifying purchases? In the state of California, examples of goods and merchandise that can be charged as sales and use tax are things like clothes, appliances, electronics, and toys or recreational goods. Items that are exempt from the general sales tax are things like groceries, prepackaged food and snacks, prescription medications, and utilities. In the state of California, no sales tax is ever charged on these essential items. If this measure were to be passed by the voters, the ballot language states that the implementation would begin in 2021. This sales tax would apply to any person who makes qualifying purchases in Oxnard. This would last until 2029, when the half-cent sales tax from 2008's Measure O sunsets, at which time the new sales tax rate would be 8.75%. This would be the sales tax rate unless the voters, at some point in the future, decided to raise or lower it. As you can see in this graphic that was developed by the city, the proposed sales tax rate would bring Oxnard into the middle of the pack among the 400-plus cities in California. You may have heard it stated that Oxnard would have the highest sales tax rate in the state, which you can see is not the case. In reality, Oxnard would be one of the few cities that is trying to keep as much of its tax revenue local and within the city, instead of that revenue going to the county or to the state. You may be wondering, what would the city plan to spend this revenue on if the voters were to pass this measure? Since Measure E revenue would be going into the general fund, it would be funding the many general services that are supported by that budget. A survey of residents identified many priority areas for this funding. These included public safety and 911 services, landscaping and tree trimming, restoration of the city's reserves, cleanup of trash and litter, recreation services, road repairs and maintenance, and addressing homelessness in the city. So now you may be asking, do we really need an additional tax? Why can't they just better manage the money they currently have? This table lays out the revenue and cost projections for the city for the next few fiscal years. As you can see, for the new fiscal year starting in July 2021, the city is projected to bring in about $136 million into the general fund. But the cost to provide the services by the general fund will be about $144 million. Because our expenses are larger than our income, we have to cut at least $8 million from this coming year's budget. This trend sadly continues with each subsequent year, with our deficit growing and our income not growing fast enough to keep up with costs. Even with the budget cuts we've already experienced, the financial ripple effects from COVID-19 will be something that our local and national economies will be feeling for a while. It is estimated that Measure E will bring in about $40 million a year. As you can see from the table, even if the economy were to get worse, or even if only half of that projected amount were to be brought in, the additional revenue might have the potential to help Oxnard avoid additional cuts to services and programming from the general fund. Without additional revenue to address the deficit, the city estimates that we will see more reductions in services and cutting of programs in things like city staffing, the library, and recreation services for youth and seniors. For more context, the layoff of more city employees certainly means that we will see fewer services and programs. Our city's current landscaping is a good example of this, with overgrowth and less maintenance occurring because there are physically fewer bodies working in public works to cover the amount of maintenance that is needed. There's also a legitimate concern on how an increase in sales tax will affect residents with lower household income. Although another consideration is how our lower income residents tend to rely on our social services, such as libraries for internet and computer access, recreation for after-school programs, and our senior services providing socialization and participation opportunities for our seniors. So we really have to weigh out the cost of additional sales tax on our personal budgets versus the cutting of essential services that many of our residents rely on so much. So to wrap this all up, let's look at some initial outcomes if Measure E were to pass. The sales tax rate in Oxnard will raise from 7.75% to 9.25% until it drops back down to 8.75% in 2029. Revenue will go into the general fund for general city services such as public safety, parks maintenance, roads, library, and recreation. Measure E is estimated to generate an additional $40 million per year to the general fund. As for some potential drawbacks, it raises the cost of non-essential goods and merchandise by 1.5 additional cents per dollar spent. This does slightly raise the cost of goods and merchandise to residents and out-of-town visitors. Lastly, but an important consideration, is residents' perception of the city's past mismanagement of funds, such as the time period from the 1990s through the 2000s, or the management of Measure O. Although there are public records and objective reports to show that the city has taken steps to correct these past issues, this perception still persists with many voters. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you were able to get some information on this issue during this incredibly important election year. If you enjoyed this content, please remember to like and share this video, and you can follow me on social media @_GTPro.